Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our Coveo for Sitecore demo webinar session. I'll be your host. My name is Clara Boulanger. I work on the marketing team here at Coveo, and I'm really excited to be a part of today's session. I'm also thrilled to be joined by our speaker, Paul Sheridan, who is a sales engineer at Coveo. I have a couple of housekeeping items to cover quickly before we get started. First, everyone is in listen-only mode. However, we do want to hear from you during today's presentation. We'll be answering questions at the end of this session, so please feel free to send those along using the Q&A section on your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive the presentation within 24 hours at the conclusion of the event. Finally, there will be a brief survey at the end of this session. Please help us improve future webinars by providing your feedback on the webinar content and experience. For those of you just joining us, welcome to our Coveo for Sitecore demo webinar session. Now let's get started. Paul, please take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Clara. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's session. We do a monthly webinar here at Coveo, in particular focusing on Coveo and Sitecore content management, but we do touch on also some common concepts across the Coveo platform. And we'll be really, this will be a relatively short introduction to the architecture, some demos of existing customer websites, and a bit of a dive into how Coveo works with Sitecore to provide you with search capabilities, relevance within and outside of the content that you're storing in your Sitecore content management system for your websites or your corporate intranet or whatever kind of platform it is that you're building on top of Sitecore. So once again, thanks for joining us today. I hope this will be a good session. And as Clara mentioned, do feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section of GoToWebinar, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of today's session, or if necessary, we'll follow up afterwards as well. With that, I've just got two little slides that talk a little about the architecture of Coveo for Sitecore. I'll set the groundwork for a bit of the demonstrations and so on that we'll do immediately afterwards. So Coveo, at its core, Coveo is a software company. We've been around about 15 years, headquartered in Quebec City, Canada. And historically, we've been really search technology, I guess, for want of a better word. We do tend to talk more about relevance than about search today. Search, of course, is something that's something of a commodity, perhaps. You go to a search box, you type in some words, and you get some results. What Coveo really focuses on is really providing relevant content, and that can be done in a variety of ways. There are certainly manual tuning rules that you can define to boost or suppress certain kinds of content. We can also, based on the user's context, which might be their physical location, it might be their role, it might be the Sitecore persona in some cases where they're identified by the website as having certain kinds of interest, we can tune relevance of results, the order of results, the kinds of recommendations that are being returned to the user based on that sort of information as well, that sort of contextual clue, if you will, to help the user find what it is that they're looking for. On top of all of that, then, we also apply machine learning techniques to tune, once again, relevance of content based on what have other users found, what have other users like you found, what is relevant content to them for similar kinds of queries. We'll get into this in a little bit, both from an architectural point of view and also to show you how that actually works as well. So in addition to traditional search techniques, manual relevance tuning, and machine learning-driven relevance tuning, that's really what Coveo brings as a platform, as a relevance technology or insight engine, as some analysts call it, platform. With regard to Sitecore in particular, Coveo has been working with Sitecore for 5 or 6 years, I guess now, in terms of building a connector to Sitecore as a content management system. So as you can see on this architectural slide, of course, Coveo has the ability to index, to make searchable content from many different kinds of applications, as well as, of course, websites, databases, other applications that expose APIs that allow us to connect to them. With Sitecore, we've developed really a much tighter integration, which really works in two ways, I guess. One being the indexing of content, the pages, the items that are published by Sitecore, and also the configuration of a search interface within Sitecore itself. So Coveo for Sitecore, what we often refer to as the product Coveo for Sitecore, still relies on Coveo as a cloud-based indexing platform, indexing and search platform, but also a module or a component, a package is installed into Sitecore itself, what I often refer to as really Coveo for Sitecore. so that when you publish new content from Sitecore, new pages, more pages are updated or deleted, that information is pushed to Coveo to be indexed pretty much immediately. So the page, the parts of the page that you actually want to make searchable, because typically you want to exclude things like headers, footers, sidebars, metadata about these pages, whether it's information that you might want to use for filtering, faceting, boosting rules, permissions information, persona information. So if you're leveraging Sitecore's very powerful personalization capabilities in terms of personas and profile cards, that information can be pushed to Coveo as well, so that we can then, again, as I mentioned earlier, tune search results appropriately based on the rules and the personalization that you're creating within Sitecore itself. So that's kind of the back end of the integration of Coveo and Sitecore. On the front end, then, you can configure your search pages using the Sitecore Experience Editor. Coveo has packaged up our UI components, our search components, which are typically a JavaScript framework, package that up into really Sitecore-friendly components, usable as MVC or web forms components in Sitecore, and now actually also supporting the Sitecore Experience Accelerator as well, so that your employees, your users, your customers who are building their entire website, perhaps within Sitecore, are able to build the search experience in exactly the same way that they're comfortable with the Sitecore Experience Editor or Experience Accelerator for that matter. So they can build, configure, customize a user experience, a very rich search experience within Sitecore. You don't have to go outside and write code with a third-party API to do that. Of course, we do also have the ability, as I mentioned, to index many other kinds of content. And in the context of a Sitecore deployment, this could mean a variety of things. It could be that you, in addition to your Sitecore public-facing website, perhaps, you might also have a WordPress blog, for example, or a YouTube channel, or several YouTube channels, or numerous Sitecore sites. So all of those can be indexed using Coveo, put into a unified index, so that your search experience, search box on your on your website's page, can include all or some of that content that belongs to you, that you want to surface to your users. And of course, you can tune and filter how those results come back. And we'll see some nice examples of that in a little bit. With that, I did want to get into, and I talked a little about Coveo and Sitecore and how search or relevance works on a website, combining together, as I mentioned, the personalization of Sitecore, the manual tuning that you might do to promote certain kinds of content, items that are on sale, frequently asked questions, but also to take advantage of, where appropriate, machine learning techniques to really start to automatically promote what your users are finding the most useful. And this little animated slide actually, I think, shows a bit of that workflow, perhaps, I think in a pretty understandable way. So I'll just walk you through briefly this animated slide here. So, what happens when someone comes to your website? Of course, well, they, with a browser or a mobile device, come to your website. It's a Sitecore page, typically. It's a Sitecore site. They go to the nice big search box that you've got on your page, and well, presumably they do some other things as they hit that site. Now, Sitecore might recognize, based on their behavior, based on have they been there before, are they logged in, what pages have they already looked at. Sitecore may well recognize already, based on XDB personalization, what kind of a user this is, what their persona is. And of course, that activity that they do, even before they start to do a search, is logged to Sitecore's own reporting database, experience database. And from that, Sitecore can derive, well, this is a user of persona A or persona B. Now, that same information can also be logged to Coveo usage analytics, and we'll see why that's interesting in just a moment. Now, of course, as you get to the search box, you start to type in some words, perhaps. Coveo can start to make some recommendations. Type ahead, query suggestions, we'll often refer to them as. Those can be partially, they can come from a couple of different sources, as we'll see in a moment. They can be metadata from your index, the product names that you actually have, perhaps in your product catalog, or the keywords from other pages on your website. Those are often really good query suggestions. You don't have to create and curate a list of good quality suggestions. We're just deriving that from what's in your Sitecore database, what's in your index. But we can also make these suggestions based on what have been successful queries for other users in the past. And that can be really good quality query suggestion. Again, we'll see this in a moment on a couple of live websites. But it does mean that you can get the sort of experience that users are expecting. They get this sort of experience of type ahead from, say, for example, google.com. But this is focused on what's happening on your website. What have been successful queries that have led to results, queries that have led to results that people have clicked on, and so on, or products that they've purchased, perhaps. So you can really help to guide users based on what's been useful for other users like them in the past on your site. So as the user then actually accepts the query suggestion or in fact searches for their own unique terms, that information of course is logged to Sitecore. It's also logged to Coveo usage analytics. What have people searched for? Did they get results? Well, actually not to that point yet. What are people searching for? That's information that then we can again put into that feedback loop through machine learning, but of course also report on for your own business analysts and knowledge within your organization. So the query then is logged, it's passed to Coveo. We then, based on what we've learned from other users' behavior, we don't just learn to make good query suggestions, we also learn to promote automatically, potentially, good quality content, results that other users like you, like the current user, have gone to, have clicked on, have made use of in their workflow. Based on, so promote those potential results, those potential good quality results. You can tune exactly how that happens, but you can start to promote the stuff that in fact your customers, your users are making use of automatically based on this machine learning applied to usage analytics information. In addition, of course, the query is also sent to the Coveo Unified Index. Once again, potentially manual rules can be used in addition to, again, tune, hey, this product's on sale, I want to push that higher up in the result list, or my frequently asked questions are the best place for people who are looking for support cases to go to, and so on. Again, that content can come from a wide variety of sources. It could be, of course, your Sitecore website, but it could be content management from other applications. It could be CRM-related information, YouTube videos, and so on. So that result that contains both machine learning promoted results and also, I guess, more traditional search results can then be returned, of course, to the Sitecore website, formatted appropriately based on the look and feel of your site, and in fact, of course, returned to the user. Now, what the user does after that, of course, they might click on one or more results. What the outcome of this search, the results they get back, what they do with those results is once again logged into Coveo Usage Analytics, because once again, that's important information to report on, certainly, and it also feeds into Coveo machine learning to help continual improvement of the results that your users are being given. So that's just a short sort of walkthrough of how Coveo works with Sitecore, and I really wanted to lay out a little bit of a landscape in terms of how traditional search techniques and machine learning work together to achieve the sort of results that you're going to see in a couple seconds from some real customer websites. So if you'll bear with me for a second, I'm going to swap over and show you, oops, not that, a couple of customer websites that have implemented Coveo and Sitecore. And I try to pick a couple of fairly different use cases from a sort of an informational website point of view, a product catalog point of view, and a couple of interesting user interface selections, I guess, to give you an idea of what can be done with Coveo and Sitecore, and indeed, of course, content coming from inside and outside of Sitecore. So the first site I'm going to show you here is a relatively new customer of Coveo. It's the Airline Owner and Pilots Association of the United States, and they have content from quite a variety of sources. They have, of course, their Sitecore website, which they're using for their primary content management platform. They also do have blogs that are coming from outside of Sitecore. They have a sort of discussion forum area called a Hangar, and they provide a wide variety of kinds of information to airline owners and pilots, as you can imagine. They are making use, and this is their search page. It is very much a Coveo search page, a little bit of customization of the look and feel, but pretty much the components that you see here are the sort of things that our customers, generally speaking, implement in a very similar way on their sites. So these might include what we call filters or facets over here on the left-hand side, providing an ability for a user to drill down, to focus, to narrow their search to specific kinds of content, perhaps, based on, in this case, perhaps content types. There are different kinds of sites, and you can see here that, of course, you can expand out these facets. You also see a count of how many results you're going to get for each of these facets as well. This is all automatic. These are very out-of-the-box components here. They're applying certain kinds of tags to much of their content here as well, and that, of course, helps the user define what it is that they're looking for. They do have some secured content. This is a membership-driven organization, and one of their goals, and it's always important to think about your site's goals as you're, not just as you're designing a site, but of course as you're designing how search is going to work on the site. So there is some content that's locked down that only members could see, but they still like to provide a bit of a teaser here to show a member and non-member content. So in some cases you want to prevent non-members from seeing the members only content, pardon me. In other cases, you might want to still provide a link for that kind of content, but really require the user to log in or become a member before they can actually see the content. And they do also have a little date range selector here in case people are looking for content that comes from a particular date range. So of course the user has the ability to drill down and look for particular kinds of content. You'll notice also these breadcrumbs that appear when you select a filter or a facet here. Perhaps I'm looking for particular kinds of content. I've got multiple breadcrumbs that appear as I make those selections, and of course it's very easy to clear those as well. Once again, standard Coveo components being deployed on this site. The ability to sort your results in a variety of ways. In the case of the AOPA, they're only really providing the ability to sort by relevance, which we'll talk about in a little bit in terms of exactly what that means. But effectively, it's the order of results based on things like how many times do the words that you're searching for occur? Do they occur in the title of the document, more importantly than the body of the document? And any of those manual rules for tuning or promotion of results as well. But they can also sort by date, often a common sort of thing to want to do if you're dealing with news articles, perhaps. And of course, you could sort by other kinds of numeric or text metadata fields as well. It might be a rating, perhaps, or price if it's more of a catalog, a product catalog kind of search. The other interesting thing that, of course, they're making use of here is that type ahead or query suggestion that I was mentioning. As I start to type in a query, users expect this kind of behavior. It's table stakes, effectively, for a website search at this point. And as I mentioned, these query suggestions can come from tags applied to or derived from your data, be it Sitecore or non-Sitecore data. Keywords is a very typical kind of approach, or tags. But in fact, also, we can start to, again, leverage machine learning here to make suggestions based on what have been good quality searches for other users. And that's what we're seeing here with, I can tell that's the case because of the suggestions are coming back in italics like this. And it doesn't matter if I even don't know how to spell Canada, even though I live there. I can still get these good quality suggestions of queries like flying to Canada, flying into Canada, and so on. And of course, the user has the ability to accept that suggestion or not as they see fit. And you'll see as the results come back for a particular kind of query, you'll see search terms highlighted in the result list layout. Now, of course, you can also very much customize the layout of results for different kinds of content. You might want to display a picture, for example. It looks like there should be pictures here, but they're not actually being displayed. And you know, tagging articles versus discussion board items and so on. So again, you know, by default here, we're going to search not only for flying, but also fly, flies, different verb forms of that word, and so on. I believe also search for Canadian as opposed to Canada, and so on. So those sort of search capabilities really just built into the technology itself. But here, this is giving you the opportunity to build a very rich user interface, again, within Sitecore, but extending out to non-Sitecore content and helping the user to find the best content for their kind of query, not just making good quality query suggestions, but also tuning the results in such a way that the most relevant content appears higher up. It's because, of course, users are very impatient. Nobody scrolls to page 2, let alone page 3 or 4, although, of course, we're returning hundreds and hundreds of results here for that particular kind of query. So that's a quick walkthrough of what the AOPA website looks like. I'm going to show you 2 others here before we get into a bit of what the back end of Coveo and Sitecore look like. And we'll try to, as I mentioned, pick some different use cases. Milwaukee Electric Tool is very much a product-driven website. I would think of AOPA as being more informational. It's membership-driven, but really it's their job is to publish and share information for their community. Milwaukee Electric Tool, of course, is trying to sell tools. So their website is very visual. I like that aspect. In terms of filters and facets, they actually kind of hide those a little bit, but they do enable the user to select particular categories of products, use different tags that are probably meaningful to people who use their products, and look for other kinds of metadata here, cordless or corded products, and so on. Now, I can go in here once again and start to type in a query like I'm looking for a hammer, but am I looking for a hammer drill, or am I really just looking for a hammer? Well, these kinds of suggestions, again, both derived from their product catalog and from what other users have done successful searches in the past, really help the user to drill down to the right kinds of content. I'm actually looking for a hammer drill here. And again, you can see this nice, very visual representation of their product catalog here, presumably emphasizing the title of each, or the product name perhaps, of each of these products, although of course being able to search other things like manuals, be those PDF files or simply HTML pages. And of course, as you drill into a particular page, you're going to see more details about that particular product. So a relatively simple interface, but I do think it's a nice one, and it's well suited to the needs of their customer base. So providing not too many different filters or facets, providing a really easy to use and honestly fairly big search box, helping the user to drill down to the right kinds of content for themselves here, to serve themselves and to hopefully buy more products. The last quick example I'm going to show you, and this is, again, I guess, sort of an informational website, a bit like the AOPA site in a sense, the University of Minnesota's health services. The interesting thing about them is that their layout is really quite rich. They've got really three main kinds of content here. There's providers, doctors, nurses, and so on. There's locations, hospitals or clinics, and then there's information about healthcare. And they need to be able to provide a good layout for all three of these kinds of information. And they've done it just a little differently, perhaps, than some other customers. So it's really why I'd like to show it as an example. Now, I do a query here. They're using as query suggestion, I believe, primarily just metadata here. So really the subject of the articles in healthcare, or perhaps also the names of locations. But if I go into a search for the word heart, I'm going to see all results come back. Of course, I can drill into providers, articles, and locations. But in terms of the layout here, what they're doing is really just showing, here's the top three providers at the top. Here we've got articles over here on the left-hand side about heart care and such. And on the right-hand side, what we have is locations that are related to heart care as well. In fact, they do have a Google map here. In fact, if I drill into the the location section, you'll see that the results are not just being returned as text, but also being passed back to, in this case, a Google map of their various locations within the state of Minnesota. Now, they're also using Coveo to be able to drill down and select, again, using a bit of a different layout for those filters and facets, particular cities, particular kinds of locations or hospitals, and what their specialties are in general. So I think really quite a nice look and feel, again, for thinking about the audience, their audience being people who are looking for healthcare providers or clinics, or even just information about healthcare, in this case, heart-related healthcare. So some interesting ideas about how to integrate relevant content and search capabilities into a variety of kinds of websites. And I hope that those little examples have given you some ideas about what you could potentially do with your sites or your customers' websites as well. With that, I'm going to show you a little bit about Coveo itself, the Coveo cloud platform from an administrative point of view. Not going to get into too much detail, but I wanted to show you just a bit of an introduction, and then show you, again, what Coveo looks like specifically within Sitecore for building sites very much like these. So here I am in the Coveo cloud platform. I'm actually going to start off on the usage analytics side, because I think this is really important. As I mentioned, we're logging to Coveo's usage analytics platform, hosted in the cloud, information about what do people search for, of course, what do they click on, what do they do next, how do they revise their query, what do they do afterwards, and potentially even custom events. Did they purchase something? Did they make an appointment with a doctor? Did they become a member of the AOPA? Those sort of custom events and custom dimensions or fields, if you think about it in a database kind of way, can all be logged to Coveo, so that we can provide, firstly, usage analytics reports like this, which your business analysts will find useful. I want to know who from particular regions perhaps is searching on my website. What are they searching for? Are they on a mobile versus a non-mobile device? What are the most common queries that we're getting? What are the most common documents people are getting to? And I'm using documents here in a fairly generic way: pages, PDF files, product catalog items, and so on. And of course, you can drill into more detail. So I wanted to see, well, that's interesting. 2 people from Nova Scotia have been searching on my website. What have they been searching for? I could drill into this part of the pie chart and see exactly what's going on there. So if you're trying to tune how search works on your website for certain kinds of users, this sort of chart, this sort of analytics is really useful in order to understand, what are these people searching for? Are they getting to what they're looking for? And even in a little more detail, this is a fairly typical sort of dashboard that our customers will use. What are people searching for and not getting any results? That's interesting. It's what I think of as a content gap. Perhaps they're looking for something that you should have published. They're asking questions when they come to the search box on your page. They're giving you all kinds of clues about what's important to them right then. So what do you do with that information? Typically, what you might do is, well, do I need to publish some new content because people are asking about new things? That's one possible outcome. Another might be they're just using different words, different terminology than perhaps you have used in your existing content. So perhaps you might retag your content appropriately to serve the express needs of your customers or community. Or you might use Coveo to simply create synonyms. Maybe they're just, again, using a different word than you happen to use or different terminology. So Coveo has the ability to create synonyms in a thesaurus to address those sort of challenges without having to retag your content. And which one you pick, which approach you pick, is really going to depend on your needs and your organization and how you do things. You can also see some other interesting information here, too. Queries that don't lead to a click type of event. This is potentially an interesting outcome. It might indicate that, yes, users get results for what they search for, but they don't like what they get back. They don't do anything with it. So again, it might be something that you might want to look at as a business analyst from time to time to see, well, what's going on my site? Am I delivering relevant content? What can I do to improve that? To improve that, often what we'll do is look at what we call query pipelines. And these are where you can define some of these rules for tuning search. So as a little example here, this might be where you would define synonyms. If you've got acronyms that are really specific to your organization, and you have customers who don't necessarily know the ins and outs of the language effectively on your website, this is a great place to start to create a few of those synonyms. I rarely suggest that you try to recreate Roget's thesaurus here, because that tends to reduce the precision of the queries that a user is doing at the expense of broader relevance or broader reach, I suppose, perhaps. But if you start to notice in these reports, in these dashboards, that people aren't getting results for what they're searching for, you might consider creating some synonyms in here. And as you can see, it's a very straightforward process. This is also where you could define featured results, key matches or top results for particular queries. So there are cases where you as the administrator, you as the product manager perhaps of your website, you know what the best result might be for a particular kind of query, or you want to force something to the top of the result list. This is where you can do that sort of thing. You might notice over here also that there are conditions that you can apply to any of these sort of top results, or indeed any of these options that you see in a query pipeline, typically based on the user's context. It might be where they're physically located, based on their IP address. It might be, are they on a mobile device versus a non-mobile device? It might be, are they logged in? What do you know about them? What's their persona in Sitecore? So you can tune here some of those top results. And this can be a really easy way to start to promote good, what you know is the best content for particular queries. If, on the other hand, you want to be more general, I simply want to promote certain kinds of content in general. As an example, perhaps I've tagged all my frequently asked question pages, which I know are good quality. They help to serve customer requirements. I've tagged them with the acronym FAQ in the title. Well, let's just always boost these by some nice big ranking modifier, some relevant score, assuming, of course, that what the user is searching for exists in this FAQ document. We'll push that up higher in the result list. Again, we could apply certain conditions to this. See an example here for users who happen to be located in Japan. Let's promote certain kinds of content. So again, these sort of rules can be very helpful. And again, I would suggest that you think carefully about what sorts of rules are appropriate for your audience, for the people who are coming to your website. You test, you look at these analytics reports, you see what's working well, and you adjust as you need to. You will notice also that you can have multiple different query pipelines. And this means a couple of things. One, you could have different sets of rules applied to different pages on your website, perhaps. You could have different rules for different kinds of users, different languages, perhaps. And you can do testing. So as you start to consider, should I apply this new rule to tune relevance for certain kinds of users, for example? Let me test those. Let me get real users to hit them over a period of time. Let me send 10% of my real users on my website to that new query pipeline. Now, they don't need to know that there's anything different, of course, but you can measure, again, using data, using those analytics reports. How successful are these being? Are they driving the behavior that you want? Whether that behavior is as simple as people engaging, clicking on pages, or potentially, this is again where it's useful to log additional events like purchase events or becoming a member kind of event, whatever is important to your organization as a goal. Search is a key part of that. People expect search to get them what they're looking for, and this A/B testing capability is a key part of that in my mind. As I mentioned, I'm not going to go through all of the Coveo platform by any means here, but I did want to just briefly bring up how you manage content that is being indexed. And that's really done through this sources tab here. You can see in my environment, I've got a whole lot of sources that I've indexed. I'm doing demos for customers all the time. And you can see I've indexed a variety of websites, YouTube channels, in this case, Salesforce content. And of course, I've got a couple of Sitecore indexes showing up here as well. Now, for example, indexing a website, you can point us at an XML sitemap. You can define rules around what content to include or exclude. You can extract metadata from these web pages and so on. For Sitecore content, as I mentioned, there is a module, a package that's installed on Sitecore, and that's really where you manage the way in which Sitecore content is indexed in Sitecore, from the Sitecore side of things. So you don't actually do much management of it here, but you do see, of course, that Sitecore sources, Sitecore indexes in their terminology, are available and usable here from Coveo itself. With that, I'm going to switch over and show you a little of what Coveo looks like inside Sitecore itself. I'm just going to log into my Sitecore instance here. Bear with me a second. There we go. Logging into my Sitecore instance, what we can see here now is as I go to the Sitecore control panel, as I mentioned, there is a Coveo package that gets installed. You can see it over here, Coveo search. And this is where you can manage Coveo. There's a link to that Coveo cloud index, the Coveo cloud admin UI here. There's a link also to a diagnostics page. And this is interesting for a couple things. One, this is how you can troubleshoot your connection between Coveo and Sitecore. We're at this point going out and calling the API endpoints of Coveo to make sure everything is indeed up and running, and it is, of course. This is also where you can see information about what's been indexed by Coveo and the various configuration files that you can modify in order to change how Coveo and Sitecore interact. Once again, what pages are being indexed? You don't necessarily want to index everything that is in Sitecore. You might want to limit the parts of the Sitecore content tree that are being indexed. You might want to limit the parts of pages that are indexed. Again, leaving out headers, footers, sidebars, they don't really help. If a user searches for something and it occurs in the footer of every single page on your Sitecore site, that's not terribly helpful. So leaving out that header, footer, sidebar information from the indexing process is often very helpful. If you're actually ever needing to completely rebuild your index, that is still done through Sitecore Standard Indexing Manager. We'll see here in a second as that comes up. In just the same way as you'd manage your Lucene or Solar indexes, you'll notice that Coveo is replacing here the master and web indexes in Sitecore. So you would still use Lucene, or in a more modern implementation, Solar, for the internal only indexes, the ones that are effectively just quick database lookup capabilities for the Sitecore application itself. The master and the web indexes are really what's customer, or I guess administrator facing, in terms of when you actually do a search through the search box, what are you searching? It's these indexes, these Sitecore indexes, and those are what are pushed to Coveo, of course. And then from the point of view of actually creating that search interface, as I mentioned, that's really done through the experience editor. So I'm just going to go and log in or connect over here, and we can see that I've got a couple of search pages created, including a Coveo search page. And I can simply go into my experience editor and edit that page. So what Coveo provides is a set of components that you can add into your search interface, or of course configure within your search interface. Things like those filters and facets that we saw on the actual example websites. Things like result list templates, so I can change the look and feel of results for different kinds of results. I want to display a person's picture when people are coming back in a search result, but for other sorts of pages, I want to display perhaps a little more detailed information and a fairly generic icon. So those template components are easy to manage. Things like the facet component, of course, you can add a new component by clicking up here, or if using the Sitecore Experience Editor, Experience Accelerator, of course, you can use that. I don't have that installed in this instance of Sitecore, my apologies. And then, of course, you can modify how it works. I think that, once again, just to reemphasize, the value of this to our customers is typically that the person who is designing the Sitecore interface, configuring the Sitecore interface, they don't have to be a developer. They don't have to go and write code. They can do the sort of tasks that they are familiar with within Sitecore. I can select which Sitecore fields that are facetable that I might want to use as a filtering field here. It might be the published date instead of the template name, for example. These facets or filters can also be, there's a lot of more advanced options that you have control over here, but once again, without having to write code or need to be a developer to do this. What order do I want the facet values to be displayed in, alphabetically or based on number of times that values exist, and so on. And then I think really the sort of parent component within this interface is really this Coveo search interface component. And this is where you can do things that get pretty interesting with regard to boosting and filtering rules. So kind of a familiar look and feel, I guess, or model to the way in which rules can be defined within Sitecore natively. So Coveo's integration into Sitecore, really, we try to fit into the whole Sitecore look and feel and capabilities here. So here's how you can, inside of Sitecore, create rules to say, well, in this case, I want to boost a certain kind of result. In this case, I want content from this part of the Sitecore content tree. I want that to be boosted up higher in the results than other kinds of content. So I've defined a little rule here to say where the item comes from a particular part of the tree or as a sub-item there, let's add a nice big value to the score, again, to that relevance calculation. As you can see, there's lots of other ways in which you could tune relevance here within Sitecore as well. It might be based on particular fields. Where the product category equals on sale. I want to promote content that's on sale up higher. So this is how you could define a rule to do exactly that. I should, while we're here, be very clear. These expression rules editors, they're a capability that's available in the what we call the Enterprise Edition of Coveo for Sitecore. We do offer a Pro and an Enterprise Edition at different price points. In the Pro Edition, you can still do the same sort of thing, typically either the way I showed you in the Coveo Cloud interface itself, or actually in code. And we do, of course, document how to do that. It's not terribly complex, but the Enterprise Edition does really give your Sitecore administrators the capability to define these rules themselves and take a little more ownership of that capability. You can also see in here that we do have the ability perhaps to also automatically promote content based on persona, as I mentioned earlier. Again, that's an Enterprise Edition capability of Coveo for Sitecore. There's filtering rules you could define if you wanted to limit what's being returned on this search page to, again, particular kinds of content only. not just boosting rules, but filtering rules. These can be defined in here as well. And many other more advanced search options, again, available to you here, whether it's a matter of including external content from other sources, those YouTube channels or other websites that Coveo is indexing. Content from those can be included in the results within your Sitecore page as well. With all that, I think, again, this is meant to be a relatively brief introduction to Coveo for Sitecore, introduce you to a couple of examples of customer websites, give you a small flavor of what Coveo looks like within the context of Sitecore and what the capabilities of Coveo itself are. We'd be happy, of course, to talk with you further. We'll reach out to you after today's session and ask if we could help you with perhaps a more detailed demo or discussion of the capabilities of Coveo and Sitecore. But at this point, Clara, I'd be happy to open up the floor to any questions that may have come in.
Thank you, Paul. That was very interesting. Feel free, everyone, to type your questions in the control panel to your right. We still have time to answer a few of your questions. We're gonna start with some questions that we already have. So, Paul, here's the first one: are analytics available for all versions of Coveo for Sitecore?
Yes, they are. That's true. Actually, I just opened up here on the screen our homepage for the Coveo for Sitecore product, and this is actually a good place to start when you're thinking about Coveo and Sitecore. We do offer two editions. There's a Pro Cloud and Enterprise Cloud edition, and they do both offer the usage analytics capabilities and the machine learning capabilities built on top of that as well. There are a couple of slightly small differences in how that works, but we'd be happy to talk to you about that in more detail.
Thank you. Next question: are out-of-the-box Coveo components web forms or MVC components?
Good question. Today we support both. At some point in the future, we're going to be only MVC, but for the short-term foreseeable future, as Sitecore supports both, we continue to support both kinds of components.
Thank you. Next question: does Coveo support language fallback feature that comes with third-party module like Alex Shuba?
It depends on the version of Sitecore that you're looking at. For the more modern versions of Sitecore that actually have language fallback as a embedded capability within Sitecore, we do support that. We don't support language fallback, the sort of very clever, very well thought out, but still sort of hacks, perhaps, if I can use that word, non-judgmentally, that say the Alex Shuba fallback module did provide for Sitecore 7 and earlier versions. Again, we'd be happy to talk with you about your needs in more detail. Coveo does support Sitecore as far back as version 7.2 and of course right up to version 9.1 today as well. But there are a few interesting add-ons like the language fallback module that are a little different depending on the version of Sitecore that you have.
Thank you. Next question: if some content cannot be accessed by all users in Sitecore, should it be indexed by Coveo, and can Coveo integrate with user rights?
Yeah, that's a good question too. There's some design decisions, honestly, that you need to think about as you're putting things together here. Coveo does or can support the permissions native to Sitecore, so that by default, a user who's not authenticated, or for that matter, who is authenticated, can only see content that, in fact, they do have access to. Now, as I mentioned with membership-driven websites, in some cases, you want to take a slightly different approach to that, whereby you do actually want non-authenticated, non-members to see this content, but not to be able to click on it. They should be redirected to a login page or a sign up here to become a member kind of page. So those are decisions that sort of are design decisions around your site and should be coordinated with the goals that you have for the site. But yes, Coveo can certainly support either approach.
Awesome, thank you. What is the best approach between item crawling or web page crawling?
Well, again, I think it depends on your content. We do support both approaches. most often, I think people will crawl web pages. So a web page in Sitecore, of course, can consist of multiple different items rendered in different ways depending on your templates. So most often what you want to do is index the rendered web pages. There are cases where some items perhaps that you still want to expose in some cases aren't necessarily a part of a web page. I'm thinking, I don't know, a PDF file, for example. So there are cases in which you might want to index those, make them searchable, even though they're not part of a web page. But I think that's kind of the exception, to be honest. Either approach is possible. Most often people will index the rendered web page.
Super, thank you. Next question we have, with Coveo, do we completely avoid utilizing Lucene or Solar within Sitecore?
No. So again, Coveo replaces most often the master and web indexes of Sitecore. There are a number of other indexes that Sitecore uses, again, sort of for quick database lookup effectively, just within the application. They're not user-facing, and those still remain with Lucene in older versions of Sitecore and Solar primarily in version 9.1 and up.
Great, thank you. Another question we have, how this Coveo upgrade works? Does it necessarily, is it necessary to upgrade to, I'm sorry, I'm going to start again.
That's okay.
Is it necessary to upgrade Coveo's version with Sitecore's upgrade?
Yes. Yeah, so there is, and I'll divide this up into two parts. Again, Coveo with Sitecore, there are two parts. There is the Coveo Cloud, which you don't upgrade. It's there. Then there is the Coveo for Sitecore package that is installed into your Sitecore server, and that is version dependent. So when you upgrade Sitecore, you will need to upgrade Coveo for Sitecore as well, but not the cloud component. It is backwards compatible to, well, forwards compatible to newer versions of Coveo for Sitecore, but you do need to upgrade the Coveo for Sitecore package that's installed on your Sitecore server or servers.
Great, thank you, Paul. Another question we have, can you give estimates of how much time you should tell a client they should spend weekly or monthly managing their search and reviewing the analytics?
That's a very common question and a very interesting one. I could go on for a while about it, but I won't. I'll keep it fairly short. I would say it depends on how important relevance is to your overall goals for your site. It's going to vary a little depending on where you are in your deployment phases as well. Looking at those usage analytics on a relatively regular basis to understand those content gaps, what are people searching for and not finding, how much is search driving purchase behavior, perhaps on a commerce website, those sort of things. I would think you would want to look at those more frequently when you first roll out your website, of course, and when you make changes to search rules or entirely new types of content, you might want to make sure that people are getting to the stuff that you're putting out there. That said, I mean, looking at those weekly, if that's in line with how you review your site overall, not just how search works, but how your whole website is working, seems like not a bad time frame to do that in. I would typically suggest that you work with your Sitecore implementation partners who have a lot of experience, both with Sitecore, of course, and also with Coveo, in order to figure out what's important to you, how key is relevance to your overall website, to define that. We do actually have also a service that we offer. It is an additional cost, what we call Coveo Success Managers or Customer Success Managers, and they will work with implementation partners and customers to help them to build reports that are dashboards that make sense, that are tied into their goals for their site, and to review those and to make recommendations. Often we find that our customers take advantage of that sort of additional service, or our implementation partners are also well qualified to deliver that as well. Even just helping you get off the ground, understand in general how to do that yourself on an ongoing basis, that can be super helpful as well. I hope that helps with that question. It's a bit of an open-ended one.
Thank you, Paul. That was a good answer. We do have another question here. If there is an error during the indexing of a content item, is there a way to initiate reindex of that content via Coveo Cloud?
Yes. So if it's Sitecore content, you can re-index from Sitecore. Again, the initiation of indexing for Sitecore content is done from Sitecore. So if there's an error during the indexing process, the information is logged to both Coveo and to the Sitecore logs. That diagnostics page that I was showing you back over here also helps you in that process, and there's a diagnostics package you could download. If there's a really quirky error, perhaps, sometimes our support team will often suggest that you download this diagnostics package. It packages up all the Sitecore and Coveo logs and sends it to our support team so they can help you with that. If you're talking about non-Sitecore content, yes, absolutely. Say we're indexing, here's a simple example, a YouTube channel. We can see what's happening with that. If there's an error with it, I can kick off the reindexing process manually, refresh the index, or in fact do a complete rebuild of the index. And most typically for this non-Sitecore content, you're going to be indexing on a schedule. So we're going to be, whoops, that's not schedules. You can decide how often you want to rebuild that index for your non-Sitecore content. It's more of a scheduled approach to indexing that. I hope that helps with that question.
Thank you so much, Paul. I don't see any more questions in the queue, so I think now will be a great time to wrap up. Just a couple of quick reminders before we sign off. We'll send the recording to all attendees within the next 24 hours, and please remember to help us improve future webinars by completing the brief survey at the end of this session. On behalf of Paul and the rest of the team, I'd like to thank you for attending our Coveo for Sitecore demo webinar session. Thank you. Have a great day.